Welcome to another video of GeoSpinach, where today we're going to talk about logistics and mobility in war, and why logistics is probably the most important factor in achieving victory. Now, let's start with the very basic things. What do we mean by logistics and mobility? In simple terms, it's the ability for the attacker, while conducting an offensive operation, to be able to maintain its forces to their maximum of their fighting capability. And the same applies for the defender. After a combat has ensued, the faster it is able for the defender to be able to reinforce his units up to the strength that he requires. Now we start from logistical quantity. What do we mean? Is the amount of quantity that you possess as an army, as well as how versatile that quantity is. It means, do I have to use diesel and petrol, or do I use one of them, or one of both? Do I use 7.5, 5.6 calibers? The versatility matters a lot, because you may have a lot of equipment, but your equipment might vary in range, and as a result, your supply situation becomes massively complex. So, as simplified supply is, the better it becomes. Now, the amount of existing supplies at the front line is also vital and obvious factor that plays a role. Now we go to logistical quality. Now, quality will imply the quality of the transports. So more to you, many people don't know, the German army was partially horse-drawn, or even I can say was fully horse-drawn. So the speed at which the supplies could reach the troops was much slower than the actual speed of the attacking forces, and that caused massive issues. And then we have another problem, which is how expensive the equipment are, and we're going to look a bit into that later. Then we have the supply speed, so that quality of transport equipment we talked prior. How fast can they move? How well they are protected? Do they have anti-air above them, or do they have air superiority? Can they move in hard terrain? So do they use half tracks or just tracks? How able are they move? Are they able to move in cities, or in destroyed cities, or in mountain ranges? Then we go to equipment complexity. Now this is quite the key that many people tend to ignore. You can have one really nice big fancy tank that costs, for example, 20 million. Germany, I'm looking at you. And you can have a tank that costs 1 or 2 million. If I can buy 100, and the other team has 10, then in modern warfare, 100 in most cases is always better than 10. Except in the situation where the commander that takes force of those 10 tanks is so superb, as Clausewitz says, that it's up to the commander's job to achieve the victory using those superb forces. Outside of that, QR numbers tend to matter way more, and the cheaper the better in most situations. I mean, you can have the best soldier in the world that's super expensive to maintain, or you can have way more of them. It really matters of what school of war one follows, but based on the school of war that one follows, there's a thin line that crosses between them. Now we go to geographic limitations, which, as the word sounds, if you're fighting in the mountains, I can guarantee your supplies will be fucked. And what we mean by that in practical sense? In practical sense, what we refer here in generally as supplies is, I have an artillery piece that can fire 6 rounds a minute. Let's say I can fire, my normal supply line will be 200 artillery pieces per day, which is quite a big amount of firepower. Even if I have those artillery pieces, if I don't have that supply of actual shells to fire at the enemy, then it's quite pointless to have those artillery pieces. It then implies that the general amount of artillery pieces I have don't matter that much at all. And that's quite an issue. And that's why it's very vital to be able to supply the army you have. If you are unable to supply the army you have, then you have the problem to begin with. And that, taking that in that context into mind, we have to think, for example, how hard it is for a unit before conducting any offensive operation. You have to know practically exactly what amount of equipment you are going to use in the upcoming campaign, as not to have those issues when the battle actually commences. And then we go to the last point, which actually might be the most important point: air superiority. And the value of air power, actually, it's mainly on the damage it causes on supplies rather than the damage it causes directly on the enemy forces. And what we've seen generally in modern warfare, and especially in World War II, is that yes, air power can have devastating effect on the forces on the ground by demoralizing and so forth, but what it really has an effect on is moving units of supplies. Trucks that are unprotected, getting hit by air means directly limiting the supply of the forces you want to destroy. So you might be able to do more damage to the enemy by hitting the supply lines of the enemy, which I'm assuming the majority of military analysts and generals will intuitively know this, that the targeting enemy supplies is much more important than actually destroying the enemy's force. Because if you destroy the enemy's supplies, then inevitably the enemy's force will get destroyed. Now let's see some more practical examples of what we're referring here. Here we have Operation Uranus. So in dual pincer movement by the Russian army by the late 1942-43. Now, what do I imply here with red and with organization, which I specified in the other video, is that once you break the enemy force, you're continuously fighting and you're moving in, the total amount of organization of your unit gets massively decreased. It means your combat effectiveness is here, now has decreased, now has decreased even more. So that will imply that even if the enemy is weak, the fact that you have lost so much organization, which organization are all of the things here, as well as all of the things I mentioned in my video in regards to organization, it means that you will actually might fail even if you have all of the available equipment in hand, if you don't have the supplies. Of course, other things affect organization as well, but supply, and in that regard, supply rate and reinforcement rate are the two most vital things. So I lost a tank. How fast can I gain a new tank? That's reinforcement rate. I lost 100 men. How fast can I replace those 100 men? Supply rate is I'm using 500 shells a day. How many shells am I receiving every day? And how, even if the army command here possesses those equipment, how fast can it be able to transfer them on the units on the front line while they are fighting and while they are moving? Now, taking that for example, let's see for example another example of the vitality and the importance of preparing for a war, thinking primarily in supply terms. Now, Moltke the Elder, which is one of the most brilliant military analysts one can study, had the idea that to go to war, one of the most important things is that if you have a generally okay plan, rely on initiative, and most importantly, have a pre-existing supply plan, which in his terms, supply plans are much more important than normal plans, you will achieve victory. And the idea is that when the German railway network, the Prussian railway networks, got constructed at that era in the 1870s, it was constructed into the idea of how fast one can mobilize its army to take it to the front line. And the Prussian railway system was created in such a way as units could be built up very fast, so in various centers of population, and be moved directly and very fast to the front lines using the newly created railway systems. And once they went there and they initiated the attack on the enemy and they pushed through, the supplies for them to, after the initial attack, already were following them because they were already in those areas prior to the attack, already getting trained and been preparing to be able to be moved while the attack took force. And as a result, when in 1870, 1871, Prussia did attack France, it literally devastated the French army. Even if in general terms the French army was much bigger, the speed of the Prussian army was truly unprecedented. But what made it truly unprecedented wasn't the fact that the German soldiers knew how to walk faster, but because they always had supplies, so they didn't have the need to stop, rest, organize, and then start moving again. They went to a battle, they won a battle, they moved on, and while they were moving on, their supplies were constantly moving behind them. One topic of Moltke, for example, he argues that no more than a set amount of troops should pass through a single road. And this argument holds true even to this day. If I have 5 roads, then each road has a limited amount of supplies that you can use it to feed. So the roads act as a bottleneck. If you attack an area where there are very little roads or there are no roads leading your attack, then immediately you're going to have massive issues. Thus, you have to take that into consideration when planning that attack. And lastly, if we see the German invasion of the Soviet Union, another topic of logistics, but in the general sense, not in regards to mobility, a topic we will discuss in much more detail later on. I'm just going to show here the argument of Clausewitz that once the battle enhanced and began, the German army was fully organized for high logistics. They smashed the Russian army, causing heavy supplies. The Soviets were moving in closer to the supply network, constantly being supplied by the Allies, while the Germans were gradually getting overextended to the point that for each German shell to start from the factory and reach a soldier, it will move more than 1,000 kilometers or so, because the roads are not linear. While in the Soviet case, for example, the Battle of Stalingrad, you have the instances of literally a tank being built and thrown into combat immediately. That implies that even if in general terms Germany had more equipment, which it did not, but even if it did, because of the lack of the reinforcement rate, the actual units on the front line getting resupplied will always give the advantage, in this case, to the defender. But this is assumed that the defender will always retreat within its economic power network, not outside its supply network. So if you come to a situation where you are closed off, then it's pointless to just retreat. And here is the concept of Clausewitz that sometimes retreat is very vital to achieve victory. Thank you again for watching. More videos will come in. Any questions you have, I'm gladly to answer. Just to clarify once again, there are 4 playlists in the YouTube channel. One is about military science, as the video you just saw. The other one is about war games, military scenarios where we use military science into practical examples. The other one is about geopolitics, which I will start releasing videos a bit later on. And the other one is our specifically videos about Cyprus in Greek, so doesn't bother the wider audience. Thank you again for watching. Please like, subscribe, and good night.